Hey everyone, welcome to Chapter 3, Lesson 2 on information. So this is the second of our key 4 assets that we were talking about. The budget, the schedule, the people, and the information. So let's talk about information. One of the big takeaways here, guys, is to not overlook information. That's one of the biggest things to remember. It's pretty tangible to think about, okay, I have this much time, I have this much money, I have this many people, but people don't often think like, oh, well, I have this much information. So the idea here is to treat it like any other asset. It is something that you need to actively go out and cultivate and acquire. So this isn't just going to magically pop into your campaign because you're reading some newspapers or you're talking to some smart people. This is information that you have to work for. You have to work really hard for it. So what the heck information am I talking about? Well, we're going to get into it. So let's see here. The most critical one that we're going to talk about is voter database. And that is the list of people in your election district, however that's drawn, whatever office you're running for. But it's a list of people that are signed up and eligible to vote. So that's the big picture there. That's the golden ticket. But there's a lot more to it. A lot more to it. So we're going to talk about what you do with these lists, like how you update them, and then an overall strategy of what you use throughout your campaign. So first thing to think about here is database types. And there's 3 different ones. There's government lists, party lists, and then data vendors. So a government list, that's my term, government list, but essentially it is election offices. So let's say we're in Sacramento. So let's say the county of Sacramento voter registration office, or county elections office, I think it's called. They're all called something like that. And it's by the county level. You'll hardly ever see it at the city level. It'll be a county elections office. So the Sacramento County Elections Office, they're required to provide voter lists to the public. It's public information. And a lot of districts or a lot of counties and states make that data available free to download on the internet. So go ahead and have a Google search. Heck, why not do Sacramento County? But search any county, do your county, voter list, like Sacramento County voter registration list. And you can see what you can find. So you can see what's out there. And the idea here is that this information is provided to the public, but always with stipulations. So you can't, and the big stipulation provided, always blanket stipulation, is that you can't use those lists for any commercial purposes. So if I was a entrepreneur in Sacramento County, and let's say I'm selling like women's hats, but I only want to sell them to women over the age of 40 that live in a certain part of town, I can't download the voter registration file and pick out all the women that are, because it has their age, it has their location, it has everything in there, except like social security number. But I can't pull all the ladies from a certain part of town that are over a certain age and then send them a flyer about like a women's hat sale. So can't be used for anything like that. In most cases, it just explicitly says that these voter lists can only be used for by political campaigns, for campaign activities, or for like nonprofit get out the vote activities. So that'd be like you're not affiliated with a particular campaign on an issue or a candidate or a candidate's campaign committee, but you're just a nonprofit organization that's trying to increase voter turnout and voter turnout. So you could use the list for that. So the government lists are a really great place to start, and they are most of the time they're free and fairly easy to obtain. The downside is that they don't have a whole lot of data layered onto it. So you'll know, like, typically you'll know the person's name, their location, their age, and you'll know, most of the time, you'll know which elections they voted in. And if they're registered for a certain party, you'll know which party they're registered in. So that's quite a bit of data when you're talking about segmenting out voters. And they'll have their address on there. So if you want to send them mailers, you can. And a lot of times they'll have a phone number on there too, so you can call them. The downside, though, to the government lists is that there's no additional information added on top of that about their like further demographics, like their race and ethnicity, or you can see a lot of the times there's more data about like things that people are interested in or likely to think this way or feel this way about certain issues, like cell phone number if you know that they have that, email address if you have that. So that gets layered on typically in these other two lists that we'll talk about. Party lists and data vendors. So let's talk about party lists. So the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, they maintain massive databases of voters. And their databases, this is always a hot topic, by the way, guys. People will say that, the Democratic Party is better at this, or the Republican Party is better at this. And it's always this like discussion about when the presidential campaign picks up every 4 years, that the campaign of the nominee, the Republican nominee or the Democratic nominee, will like own those lists and then build them out and do all sorts of work on these lists, like updating the information and adding on all sorts of information. And then all the criticism starts. Well, the Hillary campaign did this with the lists, or like so-and-so, like John McCain's campaign did this in 2008, and it's always this ongoing thing filled with criticism every which way imaginable. So just expect that when you start having these conversations. But the big takeaway here is that these lists will, in general, be much better than the lists that you just get straight from the government. It'll have all the registered, because it'll have all the registered voters, like sort of that baseline you get from the government, from your county elections office, and then they layer on a lot more information. Like, so your party would know if they've like volunteered on any campaigns, if they've given money to particular candidates, their cell phone number, if the party's allowed to contact them via text messaging marketing, email addresses. They'll have a lot more of that information, and that is obviously very valuable to a campaign. So the big watch out here, though, or the big headline call out, is that this list is not going to be available to you in a primary election. And the other big call out is that this is going to vary dramatically county by county across the entire United States. If you're living in a super red county, it's likely that the Democratic Party just doesn't have much of a footprint in your county, and probably won't even have a list, let alone if they even have like a contact name for someone from the party there. So that's stuff to think about with the party list. The big thing for you to know, though, is that list is not going to be available to you in a primary. It'll only be available to you in a general election once you've secured a win in the primary, because the county's not going to give that list to every single Democrat running in the Democratic primary. It's only when the party has their nominee. All right, and then the third part here is data vendors. These are private organizations, private companies that sell data assets for political campaigns. The big one here is Nation Builder. That's in my research and in my past use, that's the one that comes up all the time, is Nation Builder. And it's really an all-in-one software service for campaigns that includes like email, website, text messaging, managing volunteers, keeping track or like hosting events and the fundraising around that, and like processing fundraising. And part of that is keeping track of all of the voters in the district to see if they're supporting you or opposing you or somewhere in between. And keeping track of every last move about those voters. And they use like government lists as a baseline and then layer on a lot of information on top of that. So let me now outline a strategy about how I think that you should use these three different types. I think there's a time and a place for each type of list. So at the beginning of your campaign, I would start with the government list. Start with the basic one. You're obviously not going to be able to get the party list because you're running in a primary. And we're not really certain that we need to make the investment to pay for the data vendor, because there is a cost associated with that. So at the beginning of your campaign, use a government list. That will provide a baseline to get started with. And you're probably going to have to develop your own sort of system for keeping track of these voters. Hey, an Excel spreadsheet is going to be a pretty powerful tool in this stage of the campaign. So if you don't have any more sophisticated tech tech skills, then an Excel list is going to do it for you. If you don't have the basic Excel skills or moderate Excel skills to track data pretty well, then you're going to need to hire somebody or recruit a volunteer that can keep track of this stuff for you. That's a must. It really is a must. And then when you get in just before the primary, I would recommend, once you've built up your campaign and you're headed into that primary election, then that's when I would go with a data vendor. You can then start running a little bit more sophisticated GOTV operation, get out the vote operation, heading into that primary. And you can take your data that you've already collected, that you've layered on top of that government list baseline that you started with, and you can bring all of that with you when you sign up for a data vendor list. And then third, if you do win the primary, which you're going to, when you win the primary, and you're headed into that general election, then you can reach out to the party and get their list and layer that on top of what you already have. Just be mindful that the party might not have that great of data. So they might have a really, really fantastic list, but they might not. It's going to vary from county to county around the country. So you'll just have to reach out to your local party. And I'm sure you'll already be talking to these folks. We'll cover a lot more about relationship building and relevant people that you need to reach out to and cultivate relationships with. We'll talk about that later on in the course. So you should already be in communication with these people well before you ever need to get any sort of data lists from them. Okay, so let's move on here. Talk opposition research. So does the very words opposition research make you feel icky? Makes you feel like a creepy person? Get over it. Sorry, girl, boy. You just need to get over it. That's the way it is. Opposition research is a critical part of a campaign. If you don't like it, then all it's going to do is hurt your campaign. So it's something that you need to get over. Plain and simple, you need to get over it. You're running against somebody, and you're the better candidate, and there's reasons why you're the better candidate, and there's reasons why they're the worst candidate. And part of running a successful campaign is educating the electorate about why they are a worse candidate than you and why you are better. So opposition research is a part of this. Furthermore, a lot has come to light through opposition research about candidates that the electorate really needs to know about. And if that person hadn't ever run for office and there hadn't been people scouring the internet and backgrounds and speaking with people and trying to get to the bottom of every last aspect about this person, then the public would never know any of this information about these people. And I'm sorry, if you're taking the leap to be a representative of the public and you've done some disgusting, weird things in your past, then the public has a right to know about that, and it needs to be out there. So opposition research is the vehicle that makes that happen. So here's some different sources that you can use when you're doing opposition research. So you can look at official records. So lots of different city and county and state offices maintain records about like criminal convictions and stuff like that. So you can look those up. There's also in here in official records like voting history. If your opponent is a sitting elected official, you can look at their voting history on everything that they've ever come across. So at the local level, like ordinances or legislation, even like committee votes on all sorts of stuff. So you can use your issue guide that we crafted in the previous chapter. And I'm sure some of those issues have been controversial, and that's why they come up a lot. If your opponent has taken votes on any of those issues at a certain point, or just made public stances about any of those issues, public statements, that's all part of the official record that you can use and look into. Second part is social media. In larger races, Congress, Senate, presidential races, social media is so curated and scrubbed over the years that it's all just wiped clean. If you're running in a smaller race, maybe against a candidate that's not as tech savvy or sophisticated, they might not have even taken the time to go and look at things that they wrote years ago on their Facebook or MySpace or LiveJournal or AIM conversations. And that's fair game to dig into it. If you're not friends with them and can't see their history, then hell, make a fake account and figure out how to become friends with them to look into it. Is that wrong? No, not at all. It's serving an important purpose. One-on-one conversations. So this is just being the high school gossip. It's being the chatty person around town. Obviously, you're going to want to cover your tracks a little bit. You're not going to want to be seen as the person that's going and trying to stir things up and dig things up. But certainly, you have some good friends that wouldn't mind hunting around for some information. So utilize them. Talk to people in town that know everything. If you find a little lead, then go follow it and see what it's all about. Fourth, you can look at archived newspapers. All this stuff is online now. The larger publications probably have archives that are searchable in a digital format, and you can find a way to search for that person. Maybe you have like a little lead where you know that where your opponent was involved in something or another, and you're not exactly sure about it. Then you might need to actually go to your local library and find those old newspapers on microfiche, I think it's called, where you actually have to go and look on a screen. And I'm not really sure. I haven't done that in a very long time. Let's just hope that it's all digital and on the internet, because it's 2017. Probably 2018 by the time you're checking out this course. So that's it for opposition research. Other information that you're going to need to be very on top of is current events. This image I have on here, I'm such a dumbass sometimes. So you need to be on top of what's happening in your community. You never want to be blindsided by anybody about any local event. You need to read everything and be on top of it. Period. I know it's a bit of a pain, so you just have to streamline it. So the different things you're going to need to be on top of: newspapers, national and local. I recommend just picking a couple of national newspapers, maybe one that's more on the liberal side and one that's more on the conservative side, and in your region too. So I would read the New York Times, and then I would probably actually spice it up by reading something on the West Coast. So maybe the LA Times or the Chronicle, or the Sacramento Bee. Yeah, the Sacramento Bee. Or the Appeal Democrat, Yuba City's local newspaper. Read the New York Times and the Appeal Democrat. I love talking about my hometown, Yuba City. So Just a quick tip here about getting through these things quickly. Just you can really like first paragraph of all the stories in the U.S. politics and opinion sections. If something requires a little bit deeper dive, you can go down further. But what you'll discover, guys, is that when you are regularly reading the same newspaper every single day, you'll see that things become very repetitive. It'll be the same storyline or the same story that you're following, and all the new news will be in the first 2 or 3 paragraphs, and it'll all be summarized in the first paragraph. Beyond that, it's just like boilerplate background information that's been used on the story for a while. So my first job out of undergrad, I was working for the Speaker of the California State Assembly in his press office. And I would have to skim through like the top 20 newspapers in California in the morning. I'd have to get up at like 5 a.m. and read online through these top 20 newspapers and look for any story that was remotely related to California state politics and public policy, and get like the link to it and the title and put it into this like formatted document that would then be emailed out to the speaker along with a handful of his staff, so that when they woke up in the morning, it was there handy on their BlackBerry, formatted in a certain way. So it was like a headline and a link, but I couldn't put a link to, it was only news stories, like net new. So I had to get really good at quickly seeing like what was the new news that was happening in these newspapers. So my recommendation for you: pick 2 large national, and then all of your like local ones in your community, and then read the first paragraph of every single story that's in the U.S., the politics, and the opinion section. Another place where you can stay on top of is local blogs. We talked about this previously. If there's any bloggers in your community that are really on top of local happenings, stay on top of those. You can set up like, I'm not sure if RSS feeds still work in this way, but for most blogs, you can set up an RSS feed, so whenever they post something new, it's automatically emailed to you. If it's not called an RSS feed anymore, maybe it has a different name. Facebook groups, we talked about this previously. Don't spend a whole lot of time here if it's trash, but there's some groups that are going to be really useful. People that are like super on top of things, and like you learn about stuff really quickly through them. And then just one-on-ones with people. Just ask people like, what's the latest? Like, what's going on? What do I need to know about? People love to talk about gossipy current events around town. So just flat out ask them. It's very important to be on top of this though, because you don't want to be blindsided with anything. So that does it for lesson 2 on information. And I hope that this is useful for you. If you have any questions, as always, put them in the comments to the side, and I'll get back to you and try and address your question as soon as I can. We'll see you next time in lesson 3. Thanks, guys.